Welcome to The Greatest Expedition. I'm just so pleased to have Paul NIxon with us today, who is one of our contributors and one of our expedition team leaders. Most of you probably know Paul. He's a Path One strategist and also has coached hundreds of church planters around the country, as well as being a planter and a church developer himself. So we have the expert of the experts with us today. So thanks for being with us, Paul.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Paul, you are one of the contributors to the Greatest Expedition, and your resource is around cultural competency, getting back in the game for ministry with your neighbors. So can you just first explain to us kind of what does it mean for a church to be culturally competent? And if they're not, what happens to a church?
Well, it's funny. The first thing is I don't normally get introduced as the expert of experts, but expertise has a shelf life. And when the world begins to change, it's like I can be an expert in ministry in the 1980s, and it's not helping me a lot right now. I can be an expert in ministry in 2012, and it's not helping me nearly as much as it needs to. So there's a learning curve with ministry, and it all has to do with culture. It's all about context. Now, some of us who may be listening to this have served in different contexts, different parts of the country, in the city, in the country, and different settings, and you realize, whoa, what worked there is not going to work here, and we have to adapt. And it's but there's a sense in which sometimes we're in the same place. We're not moving around, but everybody else is moving. The world around us is shifting. Context changes. And then we went through the pandemic where all the rules changed. And the culture went through very, very rapid shifts. So a church has to be up to speed with what's going on right now around it. But here's the problem. We build these buildings, and we settle inside the brick and mortar. And by the time we do the first renovation, we don't even know what's going on outside. We're all driving in. We've probably all bought new houses. Now we've moved further out. We come in, we go. We don't even buy the donuts in the neighborhood. We're importing the donuts even from another neighborhood into the church. And I just find so many churches, by the time that they've been around for about 30 years, sometimes 20 years. Yeah. They were new. Yeah. They were so on their game, and just 20 years, and all of a sudden they're so behind the curve. So it's a really big challenge for churches to be able to step outside their space into their context and to know, what am I going to do to design ministry with my neighbors?
Absolutely. And it's continuously changing, which means we have to have our finger on the pulse continuously. Yes. And sometimes as the church, we bring in information and we work on that same information for years and years and years without going back out and checking on it. Yeah, absolutely. So in the resource that you offered, you talked about baselines as one aspect of cultural competency. So tell us a little bit about baselines.
I lived a part of my life in the Dallas area. They have a baseline road there, but I really learned about baseline. I've been working with a church in San Bernardino, California, which the surveyors started in San Bernardino because that was the first railway station coming from the east. LA didn't exist. San Bernardino, which is 40 miles inland, was it. And when the surveyors started surveying out from there, they created these baselines so that they would know north-south for the street grid that would become Los Angeles, which is like, 10 million people. So Baseline Road runs through the middle of San Bernardino. I've been consulting with the church that's probably a few blocks off of that road. And I always wondered, what is baseline? So I looked it up, and it really sets the north to south. It's getting our bearings. It's like a compass. It's setting the bearings, which in a setting when it seems like everything is topsy-turvy, we need some baseline. Now, I mean, at one level, I don't go through all the baselines in this book. I mean, the Bible, the gospel of Jesus is baseline. And it's a universal, and yet the gospel of Jesus can be applied in a lot of different scenarios. But it's still baseline. It's not like, okay, well, that was good for a while, but we're going to set Jesus over here. No, that's baseline. That's something we can hold on to. But there's a lot that is not baseline. And I think we get into trouble when when our habits, our preferences, and so forth that aren't baseline become drivers for the decisions we make. So, I mean, there's 13 baselines in this short book, and one baseline is about social privilege, that it often gets in our way. I mean, I served a church once where just crossing the line of BMWs, Mercedes, and very nice GM cars meant that to get from the parking lot into the building, you had to cross that. There were a lot of people that felt inadequate.
Yeah.
And that was the baseline here is the awareness that we have to deal with that issue if we're crossing socioeconomic lines. I mean, there's no way around it. We can't pretend that just because there's a good time being had inside the building that we can get past these kinds of dynamics without being very proactive. So we got to think about that. Another baseline is this idea that with God, our best days are always in front of us because we serve a resurrection, Savior. We never have to look back. The back was great. I mean, God, we've had, but God doesn't, the Christian story is not a story that peaked out in the Middle Ages, and it's that's just not what we're about. The best is always ahead, and that's true for every local church. We have to embrace that no matter how good the glory days were, the new things may be different. They may or may not involve as many people, or they might if we kind of reframed what we're doing. But they're going to be awesome, and we have to shift away from looking back, trying to recreate or to repopulate the programs that were working back when, and just realize we need to embrace the new. So there's 13 different baselines that we look at with cultural competency.
Wow. That last example you gave is so pertinent to today when churches are having to rethink what it means to be the church, and some are mourning what they thought church was that is no longer.
Right.
And so that's something that many churches are dealing with.
I'm mourning it. I mean, there's so many aspects. I grew up in a church that had Sunday night worship. And I went back to that town thinking, I'm going to sneak in, even if there's just 17 people left. And it was gone. And it was just sad because it was such a formative place for me, But there's a story that God's writing with that church that doesn't have to do with Sunday night worship that's going to be amazing, So.
Absolutely. So Paul, you, I'm sure, have a lot of opportunities of where you can engage and as an expert of the experts. And I call you that because I have always admired how you have shifted and continuously learned and relearned and are constantly in the midst of emerging things. And I think that's what makes you an expert. So you could have had a lot of opportunities to be a part of a lot of different programs and processes. But you chose, and I'm so glad you did, to be a part of the Greatest Expedition. So why did you make that decision, and what do you think makes this different than other opportunities?
Okay, so if you have a party and you send out Facebook invitations, you can go in and see who all else got invited. So I looked at who else got invited on this trip, and I said, oh, I want to go to that party because you invited some amazing people, some of my good friends, and people that I really respect their ministry wisdom and the brilliance that they bring to various kinds of things. So you assembled a really nice team, and I said, I'd love to be a part of that. But I really think that the value of what people are going to get with the number of resources, the number of contributors, it's like bringing all these people alongside as an adjunct team into the revisioning and re-engineering a ministry in some churches that have such a great future. Wow. I think it's exciting for me as a contributor, but I think it's also really a program that's going to bring amazing value for local churches. I really believe in the local church. It's been a transformational place for me. I believe I've watched it bring people together that helps to heal the differences in society, and boy, do we need that right now. And the idea of helping some churches post-pandemic to sort of retool and discover that these are amazing times and God has a wonderful vision, and then to be able to be competent in various ways to live into that. I want to be a part of that. So I want to go on that expedition.
Yeah, I like to say, and I share this with it from a colleague of mine who brilliantly said, let's not think outside the box, the cliche that we always talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's think as though there is no box. And I think that's the opportunity before us as the local church. So thank you for contributing. Thank you for spending a few minutes to tell us about the resource you're offering and a little bit more about the Greatest Expedition. Thank you, Paul.
You bet.